There are some Sundays when I speak and I feel as if I didn't really do justice to the topic, and there's a lot of reasons that those kinds of things happen. But this week I spoke on a topic that's difficult to speak on, speaking on finances, specifically the church finances, and there are a couple of reasons that's difficult for me to speak on. The first reason is that no matter how hard you try to get away from it, and no matter how hard you might try to avoid the fact, the reality is that part of the budgeting process and part of the giving that our congregation does goes toward my paycheck. And that puts me in a very precarious situation. It's a situation I'm not comfortable in. And here's the reason why. Um, it comes off as if I'm asking people to give money to pay my bills. It comes off as if I'm asking you to give me money, despite the fact that that is as far from reality as possible. My salary is part of the budget of our congregation because we as a congregation have made a decision to have a full-time teaching pastor. It's not a decision that every congregation makes, and despite the critics' comments, it's not a decision that is right or wrong in the scriptures. The scriptures, we see people who very clearly were bivocational. They worked in ministry and they worked a secular job. And then we see people who did not. We have statements from the Apostle Paul comparing ministers to oxen, which I'm not completely sure that's the comparison I want made for myself, but the reality is, he says, don't, you make sure that the oxen are fed and taken care of. He talks about ministers. He says that elders who lead are worthy of double honor. He goes through and he makes it very plain that that is an option for a congregation, and it's an option that we as a congregation took. Um, but that makes things complicated, because what do I say to people? Do I say, hey, give so that you can provide for me? So let's just get that right out in the open, right up front. My salary is a part of the budget of the church. I do not make the decisions on what my salary is. Every year, I give the elders basically my expenses, and I tell them what we have ahead of us, and the elders make a decision on my salary. That's how that works. Um, I am not involved in the decision process of my salary other than to provide information, and then they ask me whether I'll accept what they give me or not. Several times I have been actively involved in cutting my own salary, um, because we figured out ways to make things work. There were two specific moments when that happened. In 2007, I went to the congregation, I went to the board of deacons at the time of Heritage Baptist Church, and I recommended that we cut my salary because we had made a budget decision, and then we had lost one of the people that had been giving to that budget decision. And I'm going to talk about those kind of things in a minute. And so we reduced my salary rather significantly. The second time that we did that was when my wife and I moved from our home in Manchester, New Hampshire, to a parsonage owned by the church. It didn't seem right to me that the church should continue to pay the salary that would have covered the mortgage for that house, because we had friends move into that house, and were paying us to pay for the mortgage, balancing that out. And so we reduced my income then. That's the only times that I've had input on my salary other than to say, here are our expenses. The topic that I really want to approach on this, and what I feel that I did not do justice to on Sunday, is that we have a responsibility. We have a role in deciding the budget for a congregation. We, the congregation, vote on a budget every year. This is actually required by law that we have a budget as a nonprofit organization. But we vote on a budget that is reviewed by the elders. It comes out from the ministry heads, the volunteer leads, make decisions on what their aspect of ministry will require this year, and then we build a budget based on that, what they believe is necessary as a ministry of the church. The congregation then receives that budget well in advance, and this is different from the way that it's been done in the past, but we've set a precedent In 2010, we set a precedent that we would give the budget to the congregation weeks in advance so that they could review it, so they could ask questions. And then we could come out from that and approve the budget, to affirm that budget and say, this is what we're committed to. Now, I want to read to you a passage of Scripture from 2 Corinthians because it pertains to this topic. And last Sunday we spoke from 2 Corinthians chapter 8, but 2 Corinthians chapter 9, the Apostle Paul says this, it is superfluous for me to write to you about the ministry for the saints, about giving to the ministry. For I know your readiness. I know I have boasted about you to the people of Macedonia, saying that Achaia, that's the region where Corinth was located, has been ready since last year. Your zeal has stirred up most of them. So he's saying to them, hey, your willingness to give, your prosperity, your commitment to this is what has stirred the rest of the church in this area, this region, to be willing to give. But I'm sending the brothers so that our boasting about you may not prove empty in this matter, so that you may be ready, as I said you would be. And he says in verse 5, I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to go on ahead of you and to arrange in advance for the gift you have promised, so that it may be ready as a willing gift, not as an exaction. When we set a budget, we make a commitment for a year to pay the bills of the ministry. And the reality is that ministry costs money. And we, as the members of the congregation, whether you're a voting member or not, there is a budget that we have committed to, and we belong to that. Yesterday, we talked about from 2 Corinthians 8 that giving is an act of worship. It's about Christ. It's about going back to God. We said it's an act of growth, God working in me. It is an act of discipline. I place requirements on myself and make a commitment that I'm going to follow through, and it is an act of belonging, that we as a part of a community give to this. The Apostle Paul says, make sure you follow through. He says, if you make a commitment, you follow through to the end. You were willing to be generous. He says, now be generous. Later on, he says this in verse 10, he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way. See, there is this thing called the prosperity gospel. There are preachers running around saying, if you give, God will give you more. That's not necessarily wrong, but the problem is that what they say is if you give a little, it will flip a switch and God will give you more, and you will become rich, and you will become wealthy, because if you give to God, God will give back to you. That is not Bible. What the Apostle Paul says here is that when you give, because you know that the money you have has come to you, because the God of all things is giving to you all you have. When you go to God and you give back to Him, He will bless you so that you can bless others. That He will continue to increase the harvest of that you will be, when you are enriched in every way, you will be generous in every way. We often don't think about it that way. I want to encourage you as a church, as believers, as a congregation. Our giving needs to be about God's generosity. It needs to be about God gave me what I have, and I am a steward of it, and I am giving back to God so that I can be a part of the cycle of generosity. See, here's what happens. We have an act of worship. I am worshiping God. God has given to me, and I'm going to give back to Him what is already His. It is an act of growth. As I grow, as God grows within me, my maturity, my spiritual growth, I grow my giving because I understand more about God. I give back more to Him. It is an act of discipline. I have to commit myself to stay focused on God. And it is an act of belonging. We are all focused on God together, paying the bills together, worshiping together, ministering together. And it brings me back to God. And God is generous to me again so the cycle can continue. Giving, although giving pays the bills, giving is not about paying the bills. It is about being a part of that circle of what God is doing and owning my impact in that, taking my responsibility in that, and being a part of what God is giving. Because, I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but I want to hit the bottom, the last bit of this chapter, chapter 9 and verse 15. Paul says, "Thanks be to God for his inexpressible gift." God gives through you to his people. So, yes, in a sense, your gifts to the church are a blessing to my family because you help me, you pay a salary for me. But that's not the only role it is. That's only an aspect of it. That's just a function of being a church with a full-time pastor. And choosing that, budgeting for that, living for that. But it is also God being a gift through you to everyone else. When you give, you are God's gift to our kids down in God's backyard. When you give, you are God's gift to our community through Vacation Bible School, through outreach, through Christmas Eve, through all of those things. When you give, you are a gift to our missionaries. You are being a part of God's gift to our missionaries. And we could go through the list of them, but you are a part of God's gift to them. You are a part of God's gift, hopefully and prayerfully, as we grow and expand to one another. Why would we improve our building with your offerings? It's God's gift to all of us. Why would we help somebody pay a bill through the elders fund, through the neighbors fund? Because you are God's gift to others. In every aspect, we become a part of the inexpressible gift of God. Worship, growth, discipline, belonging back to God, and constantly growing in our lives.